Everything truth started out as unknown. Just as truth is stranger than fiction, reality is f***ing weird. Time and time again, we repeat the same pattern. A new theory emerges and it is absolutely railed against by everyone on all sides. Persecution takes over and people are martyred. Today, we are informed enough to know that Nikola Tesla was a hero and J.P. Morgan and Thomas Edison were real-life villains with a heinous agenda. However, in the day of Nikola, he was seen as the villain by society despite having invented pretty much everything. This is solely due to the control of information, and it is certainly not the first or the last time. Today, we have the impression that we are just now stumbling across the secrets of the universe through quantum physics, but anyone who has read the Upanishads can clearly see that the same theories have been put forward thousands of years ago in a slightly different language. Modern science once considered shamanism to be a form of mental illness by people who are not at all connected or associated with these ancient practices. It seems to stay this way until a competent and credible individual like Jeremy Narby steps up to actually dive in headfirst to these taboo subjects, only to find out that not only were they onto something so long ago, but in fact have already solved many of these problems for us. We still, as a society, continue to disengage from our heart-based belief system and follow a cold, stark science that is, by all means, brand new, thus a new age form of science. We will consider everything to be pseudo-scientific and taboo until somebody with a lab coat and glasses gets the balls to risk his entire monetary career to step up and say that there is a blind spot in our culture. And considering our culture is based on material goods and also very specifically based on a Rothschild central banking system, it is no surprise that this blind spot has only grown. Quantum physics is truly a mystery. Black holes are truly a mystery. Dark matter, the unified field, frequency, and consciousness all remain a real mystery today. But as strange as it sounds, it might not have been such a mystery to the ancient masters. Being a species with amnesia, it seems as if this knowledge and wisdom has been lost. But I testify today that this knowledge is indeed not forgotten at all, but instead covered up. This so-called lost wisdom is not lost, but it is hidden. We put on our dunce caps like a crown and declare ourselves to be the best. This is easy to do as long as we can ignore the ancient teachings. So, you mean to tell me that we are not the center of the universe? Well, as above, so below. Maybe Copernicus was right in more than one way. So, although it is true that a great flood like from the Younger Dryas era can erase much of this ancient knowing, it doesn't explain the sheer eradication of the words and symbols of the wisest people to have graced this earth. Nor does it explain today's scientific agenda that seems hell-bent on insisting to be the best by primarily focusing on the ancients as superstitious and naive. Events like the highly suspicious burning of the Library of Alexandria only add to this amnesia. And if you see the title of this channel, I don't have to tell you that we're all still pissed off about that. All ancient religious cultures had artwork depicting this shape called the seed of life that is considered to be sacred geometry. However, today's churches don't recognize it at all. But instead, we see this shape as the logo for Walmart and Coldplay. I don't mind Coldplay as much as I do Walmart, by the way. Further study on this truly sacred yet abused geometrical form indicates ties to the very first portion of the Bible and several other religious texts concerning the 7 days of creation. Knowing that these were not literal days as planets had not yet been formed, these 7 circles that create this pattern seem to represent a deeper and Gnostic representation of what words can only hint at. It is no surprise then that we can witness this shape in all living organisms, and it seems to be kind of a blueprint for all sentient life. In the form of curves and circles, this shape represents divine form coming into life and physical reality, whereas when we create shortcuts at the center points with straight lines, the ancient masters considered this to be a metaphor of our biological limitations. And as you can see, that forms the shape of Metatron's cube. Damn, even right off the bat, it always comes back to the cube. The language that composes our DNA seems to have a numerical value that forms a pattern, and this pattern is an endless, repeating set of 10, 5, 6, and then 5 again. One of the most ancient languages on Earth, which is Hebrew, had a depth to it that we have lost today with our language that is only meant to describe the surface level of things. What is special about Hebrew language is that it was not just letters that formed mouth noises, but also had numerical values. 10, translated into English, becomes Yod. 5 equals Het, or H. 6 equals Vav, which can be seen in English as the W. This is mumbo jumbo until we take a step back and see that the 10, 5, 6, and then 5 again equals YHWH. There's no vowels here, however. When these letters are said in a language, it clearly spells Yahweh. Ivan's gonna chime in and pronounce it correctly for us here in a moment, probably, in the comments. Is it a coincidence that when God revealed his name to man in the form of the Hebrew language, it is quite literally the same pattern as science witnesses today in our DNA sequence? Interesting that we consider ourselves more sophisticated than those of yesteryear because we have cell phones and cars, but I can't make a cell phone. Can you? However, those who built the megalithic structures that baffle us today would have needed everyone involved to be on board with the mathematics and ideals that were to be expressed by these structures. We have only recently discovered that the pyramids in Giza are a permanent celestial map of our place in the solar system. What else could they be trying to tell us all these years later? The base of the pyramid is a mathematical representation of the circumference of Earth at the equator and its difference to the circumference of the Earth as measured laterally. Or longitude? Which one is latitude and which one is longitude? Which one is north and south? Forgive me, I don't have that in my notes. But you get it. The longer dimension of the pyramid base, making it not a perfect square, was thought to be a mistake, although a minute mistake. But we were astonished to find out that it is the same ratio as the Earth being bulbous at the equator due to its spin. It is larger at the equator than it is measured from the North Pole to the South Pole. And that numerical value is represented by the pyramid at its base. The measurement from the bottom of the pyramid to its summit represents the polar radius of Earth, and impossibly so, also represents the ratio of Moon, Earth, and Sun relationship. So without accidentally making an entire video on this subject, it's worth pointing out that the pyramids also hint at the celestial axis in which the wobble of the Earth or precession takes place. This is shown via a shadow effect that we learned about in our video called Ancient Teachers of Man. But Randall Carlson seems to have the best research that shows the specifics of these ancient mathematical messages. Nevertheless, we are so enamored with the idea that we are smarter than the ancient people that when we learn of this incredible, precise knowledge, people oftentimes just blame aliens. And we really need to calm the fuck down with that shit. In fact, we should be proud of our incredible human history and the achievements of our ancestors. They are, in fact, us. Another interesting one is that we were taught in school that a dirtbag named Christopher Columbus discovered that the Earth was a sphere. Then we acted surprised when we found out that Pythagoras, many years before him, concluded this using common sense mathematics. But now, as we can see, even thousands of years before Pythagoras, this conclusion was set in stone quite literally. It makes me wonder who is responsible for writing these history books that time and time again turn out to not only be wrong, but in fact, belligerent lies. It also kind of makes me wonder who exactly built the pyramids, but that's for another time and place. During the Dark Ages, in the 19th century, scholars in Europe suspected the Earth to be about 5,000 to 6,000 years old. In the grand timeline, this period of time was only a blink of an eye ago in years. However, many thousands of years ago, Vedic texts declared a year of the Brahmin to be estimated at about 4.5 billion years. And well, this is clearly spot on with modern calculations. If you take an honest look at history, it seems that the modern science of today emerged from the medieval Dark Ages, an age that was at the pit of our cycle of Yugas that show an up and down rhythmic cycle of enlightenment to darkness, as like a sine wave, like a frequency, moving us from dark periods of consciousness and then back up to enlightenment once again. And it is worth noting that 2012, as said by the Mayans, marks the leaving of the lowest point of the Kali Yuga and thus back up into enlightenment, which kind of gives me a little bit of hope in humanity despite the current happenings of today. This cycle of yugas, of course, was coined in ancient Eastern times, further back than we can accurately date. An honest study of history further back than the Dark Ages seems to show that this knowledge was attained by the Babylonians, the Ionians, Egyptians, Hindus, the Greeks, and many other ancient cultures that are so distant in time from us that we are disconnected from it. Damn thing times out, but it doesn't stop recording. Oh, cool. And this disconnection in distance isn't just in time, but also in the form of cultural language and communication. A timeline of the game of telephone has caused us to misinterpret their findings as superstitious. And even before the cultures named above, we had indigenous people that we still seem to consider as savages. But well above our level of thinking, the indigenous cultures understood that the need for higher levels of coexistence between people and nature. They insisted on a dependency between man and nature in a way that seems to point out the obvious, that we ourselves are not separate from nature, but in fact are merely a fractal of nature itself. Thousands of years ago, in about 310 BC, a man, let's see if I can get this name right, Aristarchus, let me know how to pronounce that. We can only type in the comments, but Aristarchus. I haven't heard it said, I've only seen it read. But Aristarchus declared a heliocentric model of the solar system as opposed to a geocentric model. He declared this even before Copernicus had. As we know, Copernicus was the first to declare that the Earth was not the center of the universe. And this, once again, proves the point that we continue to forget our ancient wisdom over and over again in a form of cycles. Could this be due to the Kali Yuga cycles that the Hindus indicated? Can our consciousness be affected by the precession of the Earth? Could it be that the Earth is conscious and we are a part of the Earth in such a way, born from it, that we are affected by its movements? The same way that whales seem to beach themselves whenever the magnetic field of the Earth comes out of sync for a moment. When the science of today recognizes that we might only now be stumbling upon what the ancients knew, it gives birth to articles that pompously try to state how of what the ancients thought and what they, quote, got right. What they got right, as if we were there and somehow know better. So even when we find out that the ancients knew what the fuck they were talking about, we still speak of them as if we are here to grade their test somehow. And I mean, how much more ego can we fit into the psyche than that? In a book called Uncommon Wisdom, it is quoted, in 1929, Heisenberg spent time in India where he began to see the recognition of relativity, interconnectedness, and impermanence as fundamental aspects of physical reality, which had been so difficult for himself and his fellow physicists to be the very basis of the Indian spiritual traditions. Ancient Hindu texts, like the Vedas, are not shy about pointing out the knowledge of what today we call quantum physics and even the notion of synchronicity, in a way not only understanding modern science, but also having an understanding of what Carl Jung himself tried to teach us. Physics recognizes the existence of multiple dimensions, or even multiple universes, as we've seen recently. The same way that when you assert the events that cause a sort of a deja vu or maybe synchronicities in your life is when two of these realities come into contact, thus conjoining the upper and lower worlds. This was hypothesized by Jung to be a sort of a message to us here in this reality. This very same notion was called the Unus Mundus, and it certainly was a reflection of today's metaphysics and string theory. Dicking around with this idea, an article by a website called Ancient Origins points out that, quote, behind the stage of the world, there is a transcendental, infinite, dimensionless reality that is limited and misunderstood by human senses, which can only give a partial and misleading idea. This infinite, dimensionless reality certainly seems to point to our current understanding of the unified field, or what the CIA called the absolute. In Vedic belief, this unified field is personified as the Brahman, and in ancient Zen systems of thinking was referred to as the Tao. Both the concept of the Brahman and the Tao completely coincides with the concept of quantum non-locality, in which scientists are struggling with today. When we read these notions put forward in the Vedas and other religious texts like the Torah and the Bible, we are confusing ourselves by utilizing the word God. When we hear this word, we automatically turn to superstition and spiritual woo-woo, when in fact, that was just the way for our ancients to communicate. They utilized the art of personification to get these ideas across, as opposed to these unswallowable scientific units of jargon. Ancient Hindu scriptures point out that time is not linear, but in fact, a fractalized motion of cycles. And of course, science today is just now toying with the idea that our understanding of time as linear is completely a misconception brought to us by our limited five senses. It is certainly difficult to understand things when thinking from inside the cube. And this certainly makes the phrase "think outside the box" take on a whole new meaning. The ancient term Maya, that we have confused to mean illusion, simply points out that we are unable to experience certain things from our point of view, but seem real to those living within this prison that has been called the Black Cube. So perhaps we should start paying attention when particular Eastern philosophies speak of the Atman as a concept of the soul. The soul being something that science is still so far from tinkering with, even though we can clearly see that consciousness does exist, as we are indeed conscious. that consciousness is soul. Yet the double slit experiment that we have learned about in our first video seems to have correlations with the ancient Vedas. The Brahman was a representation of the wave function of the particle potentiality, and the Atman was a representation of the collapse of the wave function into a particle when measured and seen by a conscious entity. And for clarification of the double slit experiment, check out that first video. It's low quality, but it was my first fucking video, so, fuck off. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, and Albert Einstein himself were both big fans of the Bhagavad Gita, in which case Einstein quoted as saying, "When I read the Bhagavad Gita and reflect about how God created this universe, everything else seems superfluous. I maintain that the cosmic religious feeling is the strongest and noblest motive for scientific research." So are we about to ignore Einstein as well? I don't think that would be wise. The ancient Vedas seem to indicate that this unified field that we are somewhat familiar with today is made up of pure intelligence and consciousness. It is awake as much as it is a singularity. And today we have ideas like the Big Bang Theory, not to be confused with the terrible TV show. Oh, I'm gonna get some fucking comments on that one. It sucks. Niels Bohr himself is quoted as saying, "For a parallel to the lesson..." Niels Bohr, "For a parallel to the lesson of atomic theory, we must turn to those kinds of epistemological. You figured with the books that I read, I'd be able to say certain words, but yeah. Epistemological problems with which already thinkers like the Buddha and Lao Tzu have been confronted when trying to harmonize our position as spectators and actors in this great drama of existence." Niels Bohr also declared that, and I quote, "I go into the Upanishads to ask questions." What might be the most controversial portion of this video, the usage of crystals in ancient times as talisman of healing is also considered to be superstitious pseudoscience today. Yet we completely depend on crystalline elements like quartz and other precious stones to power our electrical devices and fuel our technology of today within your cell phone, watches, and the list goes on. This seems to be sheer hypocrisy at its most ignorant. So learning now that the ancients knew a great deal more than us about the universe, but in a different way, how should we handle some of the mythology that points to a reality in which we will deny with our full-on ego persona? How can we possibly handle the idea that the ancient Sumerian culture put forward about the Anunnaki coming to Earth and creating our species as a slave race? How can we bear to swallow a pill dealt by so many ancient cultures on Earth that have indicated that we are a food source to a highly sentient and superior species of disembodied reptiles? Because, the last thing we want to hear is anything about us not being king of the hill. And we are definitely not comfortable with being any lower on the food chain than we once were in the Ice Age. And like we said in the intro of this video, we put on our dunce caps as if they are crowns and declare ourselves to be the best. This is easy to do as long as we can ignore the fact that the most ancient civilizations on Earth speak of a people called the Wandjina, who, with the help of a sky serpent, kind of accidentally created human consciousness as a byproduct of their main focal agenda, which was not us. Nevertheless, we still seem to have been gifted with this divine spark as we are speaking today, and in fact, a species that's able to study itself. Literally a collection of atoms that studies atoms. I mean, what a paradox, you know? We are not the center of the universe. But with correct thinking and action, a little humility and understanding of our limitations, paradoxically, like the Tao, we can be.